did you hear in prayer and fasting? What did you hear in prayer and fasting? Now notice, I didn't say, did you pray and fast? I said, what did you hear when you were praying and fasting? Let's go to Matthew chapter 6, if you have your Bibles. Matthew chapter 6, and I believe, yes, starting here in, let's see, Matthew chapter 6, starting in verse 5. It says, and when you pray. Verse 6, and when you pray. Verse 7, and when you pray. Verse 9, in this manner, therefore pray. Verse 16, when you fast. Verse 17, when you fast. Matthew, this is all Matthew chapter 6. If you are a believer, your first response to a decision, your first response to not knowing what to do should be prayer and fasting. And I know that is not really controversial, but it's definitely not talked about a whole lot in our modern church and kind of the modern idea. We want to, well, let me listen to another podcast or let me talk to my friends about it. We just talked about godly counsel. I agree with that. And these aren't necessarily in a specific order, just kind of how the thoughts were coming to me as I was praying about this. But when you fast, when you pray, the Bible, Jesus, when he's speaking, in this sermon, when he says this, he's assuming that you're going to be fasting and praying. As a believer, it's assumed that you're going to be fasting and praying. And so, what did you hear when you were fasting and praying? What did you hear from God? And I have on my YouTube channel, I have some different videos about fasting. I may be talking about this more in upcoming live streams, but here's kind of the reason that prayer and fasting are so powerful together. We know that in the Gospels it tells us that some spirits don't come out but by prayer and fasting. There are some things that you're not going to break through, that you're not going to overcome unless you combine the power of prayer and fasting. And I know prayer seems a whole lot easier. It seems like, man, well, I got the prayer thing down, but fasting, I'm not so sure. Like, do we really have to do that? But there's something powerful about when you combine prayer and fasting. And I'll just say this: fasting is not eating food. I know oftentimes we say, we're going to go on a social media fast, or we're going to go on a, Netflix fast or whatever. And I understand, you can kind of use that word, but really the meaning of fasting in the Bible, the original language actually means to cover your mouth. That's what it means. Fasting means to stop eating. Because what you're saying is, God, when I'm praying, I am desiring to hear your voice more than I'm desiring food. One of the most basic elements that I need as a human to live, to sustain my life, food. I'm saying, God, I would rather not have that. I would rather have your voice. I would rather you speak into this situation than me eat and sustain my body. That I would rather hunger and thirst for righteousness than I would to hunger and thirst for food and drink here in the earthly world. That God, I would rather you speak to me than me be full right now. And fasting is so powerful because it makes your mind sharp. It gets your mind off of earthly things, because what I've found is that if you can say no to food, you can really say no to anything. And this is even an encouragement maybe for those of you that are struggling with temptation, or you're struggling with different issues in your life. If you're struggling with something, if you can say no to food, it's really easy to say no to alcohol. If you can say no to food, it's really easy to say no to even your own sexual desires. And so when we say no to all these things of the world, it's almost like a palate cleanser. Fasting is. It almost cleanses our palates, where it says, God, I don't want anything of this world. I'm clearing my mind. I'm clearing my headspace, and I want you to speak to me now. And so in the second key of knowing God's will for your life, what did God say when you were praying and fasting? Now, it may not have been what you wanted to hear, but what did God say? And I'll tell you this, people a lot of times, like in church often will say, hey, pray about what God would have you give to the church. We'll say, hey, we're not going to force you to give anything. That's not what this is about, but pray about what God would give you to the church. And people may pray, and let's just say, they feel in their spirit to give $100, and people be like, nah, no, I don't think that was God. I don't think that was God. I think that was just. But here's the thing: the devil is not going to tell you to give to the church. And even, let's be honest, even our own human subconscious, whatever, we are not going to say, oh yeah, I should just really give away my money right now. No, that's not. So if something pops in your mind and you're like, man, I think that's crazy. God's telling me that I need to pray more. No, I don't think God's telling. Yes, that the devil's not going to tell you to pray more. The devil's not going to tell you to go on a fast. The devil's not going to tell you to give up certain things in your life because of consecration. The devil's not going to tell you to break up with your boyfriend or girlfriend that's leading you away from God. So like if you're feeling those things, then that is probably the leading you towards the decision and God's will for your life. So what did you hear in prayer and fasting? Again,